பரவாயில்ல. ಅದೊಂದು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ஓகேதா? சிலபஸ்ல the ethics and values in public administration, status and problems. In that, ethical concerns and ethical dilemmas in government and private institutions. Ethical concerns and ethical dilemmas. Ethical concerns in public, private institutions. Ethical concerns in the public establishment is a greater cause of a concern. Is highly critical because public institutions having the monopoly in providing public service and public goods. So there is no alternate. The consumers in the private institutions as the alternate. If the product and service of one firm failed, they will choose the alternate of another. But that's not the case because government is having the monopoly in certain services. As the government monopolizes like the railways, the defense, in which the ethical concerns there is grave in regard to the public establishments. Public establishments. See, the audits, the audits highlights the audits highlights the cause of concerns. The ethical problems occurred in the public institutions would be in the form of certain issues, the ethical issues. One is the issues of conduct, issues of conduct. The problems occurs when the public institution fail to address the individual grievances, individual needs because of the civil servants, and the government employees the government employees, the most of the issues become is out of contradictions between the public expectations and the civil servants' response because of the individual nepotism, greed, and to some extent, it's bribes at the text. Individuals, that means a government servant's, a civil servant's attitude of neglect, towards the public. The managers of the public sector bank, when cultivated an attitude towards the public, towards the poor in opening the accounts, in access to priority sector lending, means that is a concern that leads to the problems of concern. Then the second one is there is a gap between the expectations that the adequate standards of services, a gap in the public delivery of public services between the government establishments and the expectations because of the structural bias and favoritism being influenced by certain lobbies. See, up to 1990s, in which the priority sector lending of the governments is preoccupied by the highly influenced by the political parties, the ruling party influence in the bank to take decisions of certain discretionary loans to the people. So it leads to a greater frustration, public frustration and mistrust, public frustrations and the mistrust. It is a question of public trust, a question of public trust. You say the public institution of trust expresses certain futures. That means they act with certain traits. Public establishments of the best one in constructing the public trust among the people would act in concurrence with the laws, the statutory laws of rationality, and always having the obligation of taking responsibility of the act done, and also in the front line of taking responsibility and responsiveness, utilitarian in the policies, in the actions and public deliveries, the welfare of the people at large. Then a trait of compassion. Then national interest always influences them because they represent nation. Management of resources only for public utility. Act with the sense of justice, of ensuring the rights of the people, transparency. Then there is no difference between the acts of public and the private. Then uniformity without discrimination. Then continuous excellence, and act with the fusion of values. So, say the public institution with the tendency of trust operates with 14 multiple pillars of the positive traits. The establishment of the ethical concerns, establishment of the ethical concerns in the public institution depends on the performance. The best of the public institutions performs with the four objectives. One is the performance with a legal approval. Any act of public domain performs with the legal approval and the legal requirements of the actions. Then the second one is to ensure the public servant to act with the enlightened self-interest, concurring with the people's. Then a moral consciousness that enshrines in his action. Then it is to comply. There should be a compliance to the pressure of sustenance. So ethical concerns of the public institution, public establishment is critical because of the government monopoly in serving and producing public goods and service. A public establishment act of ethicality depends on that 14 traits of yardstick. 14 traits of yardstick, and their action should have legal conformity, enlightened self-interest. So that is the role of the public servant. In case of private, the ethical concerns in the private institutions is also critical because of two reasons. One is the private scams are not exclusive of the private. Because of role of market in the lives of the people. There is a concern of contagion effect of any unethical act. The contagion effect of any unethical act of the private. The contagion effect of the unethical act of the private. That means the scams, the private scams, having a greater effect on the public life of the people. Then it questions. Then the second cause of concerns is moralities, public moralities. It is the question of moralities. The public moralities seems to be weakened. Public morality seems to be weakened because of the ethical subversions, because of the ethical failures in the private. The core ethical issues in the private sphere. The ethical issues arises in the private sphere. It is caused due to the four spheres, dysfunction in the four spheres. One is trust and disclosure. Trust and disclosures associated with the responsibility, accountability, and transparency. Responsibility, accountability, and transparency. You would say the recent scam, that is the Paytm license cancellation in 2026, cancellation in 2026. 2026, despite of the RBI warning to the Paytm establishment, Paytm establishment because of the accounting misrepresentations, accounting misrepresentations. Especially, there is a great act of mistrust, a mistrust in which the data leakages, then utility of the third party services, failure to compliance, to follow know your client norms, failure to compliance. It is act of ethical dysfunctions in regard to responsibility and accountability. Paytm repeatedly ignored the statutory alerts of the RBI, in which the data privacy of the customers was compromised by exposing the data to the parent app, that is the data leakage. It's a breach of the sovereignty of the regulatory institution, and Paytm utilized the third party services were neglected, having the oversight in following KYC norms by the third party services. So it sacrificed the procedural precisions that forced the RBI to cancel the bank licenses, So this ethical issue in which the performance of the Paytm is associated with the collapse of the responsibility of the data privacy, and it seems to be the act that deviated from the loyalty to the state establishment, loyalty and honesty, lack of responsiveness, and neglect of KYC. It is ethical concerns. It's ethical concerns. You say another case recently, the case of Byju's, the Byju's scandal, that occurred, educational corporate, a premier educational corporate, involved in a lethargic in following the ethical norms, in which the problem of accounting misrepresentation inflated the accounting misrepresentation against to the SEBI norms, the misrepresentation with the unrealized sales were all led to the inflation of the revenues. Then the second one is there is a mysterious diversion of nearly $533 million to offshore through a hedge fund channel, through the offshore in the financial market. Hedge fund, private investments in the portfolios without disclosing the individuals and entity owns it. That means a diversion of nearly 533 million in the hedge fund route. On the third cause of concern led to a gravest form of public frustrations with their predatory sales script, utilizing the sales agents to convince the low-income families to convince the low-income families to get trapped into low-income families to get trapped into the educational loans of evasive promises in the competitive exam. Paytm agents entering into the homes of the low-income group, low-income families, includes the civil services aspirants, and pledging evasive promises and getting trapped into the loans. So it leads to be a complex and multiple forms of ethical violations that is being performed by the Paytm. So it led to a greater mistrust. A mistrust became a contagion effect. People's mistrust over the financial institutions. People mistrust on the market, and the people mistrust on the career guidance establishment, career guidance private institution. Many institutes with devoted, inspiring teachers throughout India. Many coaching centers with devoted, inspiring teachers who stood for their values often. But the role of the Paytm is an ethical violation that led to generalization of the mistrust on the entire professionalism. That is the ethical concerns of this scandal of the Byju's. So ethical concerns on the performance of the private establishment is also critical because of a greater, in the post-global era, in the era of globalization, it is the role of market along with the governance, along with the government and the society, that influenced the society. So market, it leads to pollution of the market, ethical pollution of the market, this act. So that is the ethical concerns of the private establishment. Then private establishment means we are to deal with the NGOs also. The NGOs are the ethical aspects of the NGOs also very important one because of significance of the NGO. One is of being gap filler, a gap filler in providing critical basic services and the last mile delivery to the people. NGOs serves, the significance of the NGOs is of serving as the gap filler in providing the critical services to the people, and known for the rapport with the people. So it is the NGOs are the most trusted pillars of public trust. NGOs operated with a public trust because trust is the credential investments for an NGO, because entire NGO is being created by the people. It runs only by the social capital, of the people, the capital that was mobilized. So NGO is an outright public asset NGO, everything created by the NGO is not of its exclusive owned. It is a public owned, not of the exclusive owned, but the public owned. Public owned. So NGOs, the ethical, it is the NGOs are expected to be the models of the ethical norms to be carried out as its profession, profession. Most of the NGOs, the ethical issues of the NGOs are mostly due to the lack and the weakness of supervisions, the lack and weakness of the supervisions and vigilance, lack and weakness of the supervisions and the vigilance. That is the problem of the problem of NGOs was due to the lack of supervision and vigilance, lack of vigilance. That's the problem of the NGOs. The lack of vigilance is the problem of the NGOs, which can be resolved with a professional shields that the NGOs has to be established. The professional shields required for the NGOs. One is that is the NGOs triple shield. One is the internal enforcement. That means should operate with the internally constructed functional system in which every grant of every capital should reach the people to be tracked clearly. That is the accounting systems, supervision system. Then NGOs should be subjected to the social audit of external one. Second, social audit. Then third one is NGO should act as a act with a greater vigilance in which the NGO's administration should have the vigilance of eliminating the fake NGOs and fake activities by the NGOs. And the fake activities by the NGOs. You say NGOs is ethical concerns centered with the NGO is very important as like in the public and the private institution because it deals with public trust. The core of NGOs performance deals with the public trust. Weakening of the public trust may leads. So the most of the problems of NGOs are erupted because of the lack of supervision and vigilance in which the NGO administration, the ethical solution is of one is the 3-layered shields in the form of accounting, tracking the deliveries. Second one is the external audit, and the third one is a vigilance. And recent FCRA rule, Foreign Contribution Regulatory Act rules, in which recently amended Foreign Contribution Regulation Act or amendment rules of 2026 is to substantiate some ethical principles that substantiate with the ethical concerns could be the important amendment rules. One is the specification of NGOs field of actions specifications of the NGO's field of actions and the landscape of the actions. That means the NGOs has to specify their role in the sectors as particular sectors of education, health, social development, social development, environment, or the others, environment, and also the geography, in which of the states or the union territories that it has to act, That means the operational ethics is emphasized. Then the second one is the transparency. The transparency as a pillar of the NGOs. Transparency as the pillar that the NGOs has to submit all the details, comprehensive details of the ethical functionaries, key functionaries. That means the details of directors, partners, parent companies, then trustees, governing bodies, and it is the prohibited. It is a prohibition of the foreigners other than the NRIs, other than the NRIs in the board of management. Then the third one is the NGOs. Third one is the act. Yes, the act attempt to regulate the rules, attempt to regulate the NGOs' role in the social activities, which promote, which prohibit the proselytization and any act of influencing demographic changes, influencing change in the demographic structures and the political structures in the society. Demographic structures and the political structures in the society. Then a compulsory norm of accounting disclosures of the expenditure, and a compulsion of 75% has to be utilized only for the particular service act for which the capital is mobilized, for which the contributions are mobilized. That means the section 335, there is form 33B. That means 75% has to be made only for the particular, and 25% is discretionary for functional charges, functional expenditure. So FRCA Act, Foreign Contribution Regulatory Act Amendment Rule, Foreign Contribution Regulatory Act Amendment Rule is to resolve the ethical concerns associated with the role of NGOs based on the reports, based on the government reports of submitted and verified in the parliament. The reports made by government establishments like the IB, Intelligence Bureau report, that the NGOs' role of diversion, NGOs' role or being influential one in the anti-national activities, role of NGOs in instigating public stir, role of NGOs of political motivations. So these are all ethical concerns. That means grounds of ethical concerns, then criticality of ethical concerns in the public, private, and NGOs, then recent developments in regard to the ethical concerns. Then ethical dilemmas. Ethical dilemmas. Ethical dilemmas is actually a stage of decision making when a civil servant is confronted with the choice of conflict of two ethics, two values, a choice of conflict of two values. That is the ethical dilemmas. That means a civil servant choice of one value, one human value in making decision is in the cost of other values. That is the conditions of the ethical dilemmas. Ethical concern is general. Ethical dilemma is a particular condition. Ethical concerns in general are dealing with the inactions to confirm the ethical norms. But ethical dilemmas are due to acting to a particular. Studying the ethical situations of ethical dilemmas, in which ethical dilemmas, the circumstances of the ethical dilemmas in the decision taking could be categorized in three. One is the ethical dilemma as an outcome of crisis of conscience. Outcome of the crisis of conscience. A crisis of conscience in which a civil servant confronted with a conflict of his inner voice of conscience. A inner voice of conscience with the legal compulsions, legal mandate. A inner voice of concerns with a legal mandate. When the civil servant is instructed to execute a particular settlement in a place for a project, for a public project, where his inner voice of morality hesitate to uproot the people. That means in the question of displacements, where the civil servants confront with the choice of opportunity, inner voice advises him, make him to hesitate to do. But the legal mandate that he has to follow the order with the choice of loyalty and honesty to the government establishment. That means the crisis of conscience. Then conflict of interest. That means a interest between personal and the public. You see, the magistrates is associated with a particular case. A judge associated with a particular case that dealing with a firm where he himself being a shareholder, his family is a shareholder. That means the personal gains, a conflict between personal interest and the public, where we has to act with the role of public stewardship. That is the second grounds for the advent of ethical dilemma. The third ground is of a conflict of duties. That means a conflict between his personal obligation. A natural disaster occurred where he has to be there at the time his own son or daughter in the hospital. So it is a grave situation, acute situation that the civil servant couldn't compromise. Civil servant couldn't compromise. What are, see, these ethical dilemmas of conflict? A conflict is conflict is not of apparent levels, but of a deep levels of his conscience. There is a struggle of conscience in which some of the deep factors that fuels these dilemmas. What are the deep factors that fuels other factors, which seems to be the factors that exasperate these dilemmas, the exasperating factors. One is the lack of clarity in policies, rules, and procedures. The laws, rules, and procedures were always grammatical. There is always a gap between legality and practicality, legality and the reality. Always a gap between legality and the reality. Legality and the reality gap is due to missing of human factor. It is a legality of removing a place of worship, but the reality, people considered that place as the sacred groves, in which the intrusions are not allowed. That belief, see, the missing is human factor that the civil servant confronted with. Then the second ethical dilemma would become exasperated conditions because of the multiple views over a particular project. Multiple views, Jallikattu, in which the particular section considered Jallikattu as a violation of animal rights. The people of animal rights, people of animal rights want to prohibit Jallikattu in the society. But the people of indigenous, prone to the indigenous culture, it led to passions. It leads to the passion. In the democracy, it is the kaleidoscope of voices. A particular project is opposed by the environmentalist and considered as very important one for the economic development. You see the sterilite issues in the Thoothukudi. Where now it become a problem of copper deficit in the market in India, domestic market. So it is the multiple views. Then it is the subjective governance. It depends upon dilemmas. Also depends upon the emotional levels of the civil servant. The emotional levels of the civil servant is social background. And is brought up in which he is inculcated with certain values. A civil servant of higher emotional intelligence, whose decisions is different from the civil servants of lesser in degrees. Then the fourth one is difference. Always a conflict occurs between the political executive and the permanent executive. The political executive, that means the ministers always view populism as their core perception and of the immediate implementation without considering other. The ministers favor immediate execution of the freebies, compromising the fiscal stability of the state in future. But it is the bureaucratic permanent executive always views stability, always views the stability in long term. So these were the conditions. These were the conditions that leads to the ethical dilemmas. What is ethical dilemma? The three grounds of categories of the ethical dilemmas. Then the exasperating factors, the deeper factors of the ethical dilemmas. Deeper factors of ethical dilemmas as the most frequent factors. Then most frequent factors. How the ethical dilemmas could be resolved. Ethical dilemmas could be resolved with an attitude, with a conviction of the civil servant, trusting on the principle of care, A civil servant's the stand of care of the state institutions and public, which apparently seems to be complex, but could be resolved. This complexity could be resolved. Conflict of values could be resolved with clarity on priorities. With the clarity on priorities in fostering the values. Clarity of priorities. A civil services profession with the conviction of care, in which conflict of values can be resolved with the priority. In the form of pyramidal structure, of moral reasoning, where should have a strong convictions that humanity and the human rights are more important than as the priority than the nation. And the nation has to be prioritized than their family interest. And their interest of duty to the nation is more than the personal and the family. Family addressing the personal and the family. Then it is when the conflict between the nature and the institutions means it is the nature, nation and the human rights should have the higher conflict while balancing the values. By balancing the values, how a civil servant can resolve this ethical dilemmas, in which he is having the alternate by after prioritizing the values, having the alternate in approaches to arrive the proper decisions. One is the utilitarian approach, in which any decision of choices in the conflict of values can be resolved with the fruits of utility. You take the metro projects of a conflict between conservations and the present generational convenience. Projects seems to be disruptive for the present life, but the project is yielding utilitarian benefits to the large number of people after materialization. the large number of people after materialization, providing connectivity, less carbon emission. Metro project is utilitarian in the aspect of the mass rapid transit facilities, then reduction of emissions, in which major economic activities depends upon the standards of the people's are enhanced. Standards of the people are enhanced. That could be achieved. That is, the ethical dilemma in the utilitarian way can be resolved. Then the rights approach in which the rights, any act is emphasized on the rights of humanity, the human rights, any act of the rights of human rights. You take, for example, the national digital portals. National digital portal is a public asset of digital data of the people. In the era of the digital world, this asset is known for greater economic values when subjected to trade, either indirect or indirect. But it seems to be the breach of privilege of the digital privacy of the people. Breach of privilege of the digital privacy of the people. That is the rights approach. Then justice approach. A agenda in which the ethical dilemmas could be resolved if the decisions are taken with the principle of justice applied. You take, for example, the rehabilitation programs and the farm development programs. It need the equal protection of the beneficiaries, according to their intensity of being victim, in which the larger families, poor families, would have more benefit than the other families. That is the rights approach. Then common good approach. Any decisions should have, in resolving the ethical dilemmas with an approach of conferring the benefits to all the sections. You take, for example, the lockdowns at the time of COVID, environmental protection. Environmental protection is a common good approach. There is no discriminations. Any decisions of environmental protection cannot discriminate that the poor can have the access, poor can use the resources, not the others. That is the ethical dilemmas. What is ethical dilemma? And the three grounds of probability of ethical dilemmas. Then what are the exasperating or the fueling factors of ethical dilemmas? Then a strategy of resolving the ethical dilemmas of the civil servant with the principle of care and prioritizing the ethics. Then ethical dilemmas to be resolved through the approaches, different approaches. Then the sources of ethical guidance in governance for the civil servant. The sources of ethical guidance for an ethical profession, for the ethical profession of the civil servant, the existing sources are the laws, rules, and the regulations. Laws, rules, and the regulations. Laws, rules, and the regulations. What is a law? A law is an enactment of statute, a statutory enactment being done by the representatives of the peoples in democracy, is being done by the representatives of the people. It is actually a statutory enactment of the society or the ruling establishments. A law is having certain characteristic features. The characteristic features of the law universally having certain features. One is should be consistent. A law is a law always. The characteristic features of the law, it should be the rule of law across all the time, in all the situations, the same legal conscience is applied. It was the rule of the law. Rule of the law is universal. That is, rule of law is based on three components. The three components of the rule of law. One is equality before law, equal protection of law, then law is supreme, are the three components. So it applies the same in all, equality before law. And law requires social recognition, social acknowledgement to enforce. That means it has to be published. It has to be declared. It has to be published and it has to be declared and to be accepted. And the law, when to execute, to get enforced by certain formal state systems, These are the characteristic features of the law. Then second one is the rules. Rules. What is the rule? Rules are particular procedures of enforcing the law. The procedures of enforcing the law. You say that foreign contribution regulation amendment law rules, CAA amendment, Citizenship Amendment Act rules. That means a procedural guidelines of enforcing the laws. The rules are known as the codified procedures for a particular context and for a particular context in the particular landscape. For a particular context and in the particular landscape. That is the rule. Rule as the source of ethical actions of the civil servant. Rules, civil services, procedural rules as a source. Then regulations. Regulations are certain directions and prohibitions. Certain directions and prohibitions, especially in the high risk sectors. of public governance, high-risk sectors as banking regulations, then environmental regulations as the coastal regulatory zones, then regulations on data privacy. These are all regulations. So laws, rules, and regulations, those seems to be different, but are quite integrated of their own. Law is a statutory enactment, and rules are procedural codes. Regulations are the specified directives. So laws, rules, and regulations, though exist as the guidance for the ethical profession of a civil servant, but inadequate. That leads to certain deficits. Law is known for deficit of limitations. A civil servant, if he followed strictly to the law, limitations due to difference between legality and morality, legality and the reality, limitations between legality and the morality, legality and the reality. You say a particular calamity occurred, followed by the public elections. People are coming to the vote without the election identity card. If an officer followed strictly to the law having the limitations means that leads to public frustration. So there is always a difference between legalities and the reality that the civil servant occurred. Then rules are known for a particular context, a particular place, a particular system, and particular context in which the rules can be applied. But the rules are misplaced to one if there exists unprecedented context. Your rules would be, your traffic rules would be optimized to one in normal context. But you can't follow the same rule if the earthquake occurred. You can't follow the same rule at the time of water scarcity. You cannot follow the same rule of the speed limit for the water carrier. Water carriers has to perform with the speed to reach to water tankers to reach. So the same rule, laws having the problems in same regulations also having the limitations. The limitations, you cannot apply the same regulations when the regulations of credit control of RBI cannot be applied at the time of bankruptcy. At the time of the bankruptcy, you cannot apply the same regulations at the time of the bankruptcy. When you cannot apply the regulations even in the form of the detentions on the police at the time of war. You cannot apply. So these are all the conditions. One is having a structural deficits A structural deficits to to materialize people's thrust and welfare, people's thrust on the welfare. Then second, these laws, rules, and regulations are all external factors of compliance. These are all the external factors. A person's actions, civil servant's actions to be checked by the law, rules and regulations. These are all external regulations, external factors. So structural deficits, then external factors of compliance, a real act of benevolence, paternalistic attitude of the state can be done only with the inspiring internal factor, a professional success of the civil servants, whose actions should be come out of his conscience, come out of his conscience. So it is the deficit. It is the deficit. These are all off-baked guide for the civil servants. The guides of inadequate guides of limitations, the inadequate standards. Then who is the real guide of the civil servant? That is his inner call of conscience. The inner call of conscience. Inner call of conscience is the guide. The inner call of conscience is the guide of the civil servant. The inner call of conscience is not a civil servant's inner call of conscience is not of a short-term build-up. It's not of short-term build-up. The inner call of conscience is the outcome of his character, is the outcome of his cherished values, is outcome of his character, cherished values. These are all inculcated with the civil servant personality. These are all inculcated with the civil servant personality as a default of socialization. It is the socialization default. It is the role of his family, peer group, educational institutions, socio-cultural environment. They're all influence his character and conduct. That acts as an inner call of conscience. That is the ultimate guide. That is the ultimate guide. There is a contrast between the factors of external compliance. The factors of external compliance. That means external structures of compliance. External structures of compliance as the laws, rules, regulations. Always known for deficit and also known for the chances of ambiguities. Law cannot be enforced in grammatical sense. Law cannot be enforced in a grammatical sense. A civil servant of the individual conduct of concerns may subvert that grammar of the law. So it is known for ambiguities and sometimes opaque in unprecedented conditions. You see, when the earthquake occurred in Latur in 2000, in Latur district of the Gujarat, a severe earthquake occurred that led to greater loss of lives. Then it led to a realization in the national level on the importance of life insurance, importance of the life insurance for the first time. The places affected in Gujarat was rich in the diamond trade at that time, rich in the diamond trade, but peoples were disappeared. Peoples were disappeared. The loss of lives, loss of breadwinners for the families. The law is opaque. Rules are opaque. The standard there is a lack of standard operation procedures. Standard operation procedures. At the time, the present same prime minister was the chief minister, became a savior. That was different. That was different. The lack of absence of standard operation procedures, rules, regulation, it is opaque. And it focuses on formal structures, formal boundaries, but conscience, but the inner call of conscience, there always exists. It comes from the moralities. Then moralities, it acts as a compass of directions that inspires the actions, the decisions. And that inner call of conscience is entrusts the integrity. You will act even the external watchdogs are absent. You act even when the external watchdogs are absent. It serves as the anchor of the humanness. Anchor. When Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated, most of the people died, which include the cameraman. When no cameras watched, people ran away. No cameras watched, except death and the corpse. Some of the police headed by A.L. Raghavan IPS, who stood in the ground and who has taken responsibility of the time, of the much needed one at the time, that secured forensic evidences, that mobilize the people. Next action. It is a requirement of next action. It serves as an anchor at the time of criticalities. In case studies, they give some of the cases of illustrating the critical conditions. What you do, what is your choice? What you do and what is our choice means our choice should be entrusted with certain human values that act as an anchor, in which our profession, career guidance cannot be compromised. It doesn't mean that the civil servant has to neglect his laws, civil services laws, conduct rules, as to neglect. A professional civil servant should have an integrated profession, an ethical governance, accountability of the integrated profession. The integrated professions with the harmonized synthesis. A professional civil servant should be an integrated leader of integrating the external structures, the structures of external compliance, to be synthesized with the inner call of conscience, should be sympathized with the should be synthesized with the inner call of conscience. Inner call of the conscience. Inner call of the conscience. That seems to be that is the guidance. Our guide, civil servants should how is professional guidance that makes the standards of the civil servant, that distinguishes the standards of the civil servant. A civil servant with higher standards of emotional intelligence display the balance. A balance would be expressed at the time of criticality, and at the time of the at the time of any calamities, in which he shall act with his own, act with his balancing both within the rule, within the law, as well as laws and established rules and regulations, as well as the inner voice of conduct. The example could be stated with the Dr. Armstrong Palme IAS of Manipur, of constructing 100 kilometers road, constructing the 100 kilometers road with along with the existing legal procedures, rules and the codes. That is the best example. Best example of one. Dr. Then yes, Shankaran IAS, the people's collector, followed the rules in his act of liberating the bonded laborers. That is the directions of laws, rules and regulations. Then accountability and ethical governance, laws, rules and regulations. You see the ethical concerns and ethical dilemmas in government and public institutions. Then laws, rules, regulations, conscience as the source of ethical guidance. Then accountability and ethical governance. Accountability and ethical governance. What is accountability? Accountability is an obligation of owning the effect of any actions performed. Obligations owning. Accountability is of post facto obligation, claiming the ownership, accepting the responsibility after the act. Accountability, but responsibility is different from the accountability. Responsibility is of taking risk before the act. That means a subjective sense of duty. But accountability is a sense of owning the responsibility after the act performed. So accountability is one to be confirmed with the external approval. external approval, our obligations that has to be conferred. So it is a post facto verification. But responsibility is one owning the act before it performed and performing. It is a post facto. Accountability is the post facto verification. Accountability focuses on scrutinization of the act performed and the consequences of the particular action. So there is a difference between responsibility and accountability. Accountability is one of the core value highlighted by Nolan Committee, as well as the Administrative Reforms Commission. Accountability and responsibility, both are apparently same, but having the difference. In an institution, a public institution performs with much of responsibility and much of accountability. With a public institution performs responsibility in the intention of a particular project, a particular decision, and verified and scrutinized and verified by existing structures of enforcing accountability. The existing structures, especially the audit structures, then then assessment meetings, audit structures. These are all existing structures, means the project is good and it expresses the effective governance. The project is good, but expresses the effective governance in which any project, any establishment with the responsibility in the leadership and accountability of the people's, accountability of the actions, a accountability system exists. Both of them converges. But any organization missing, an organization when responsibility is missing, when responsibility is there but not accountability, when the responsibility is there but lack of structures of accountability, when the responsibility there but the lack of structures of accountability, which leads to ineffectivity in implementations. You take, for example, it was the public distribution system known for the responsibility and intentions and objective to prohibit food security needs, but not adequately dealt with accountable structures. The audit is weak. Accountable structures, lack of government vigils. That when the responsibility there, but not accountability. So public distribution system is weakened. There is the problems of flaws in the public distribution system. What are the flaws? One is diversion. Then lesser intake. Where most of the public distribution systems are not reached to the targeted section, because most of them were not delivered, and and taken back, then there is a leakages. There is a leakages because responsibility there, but not accountability. Then not accountability. When a project or the institutions missing both, nobody to take responsibility. Nobody to take responsibility, and none of them to be accountable. Lack of accountability institutions. Lack of accountability institutions. It is dangerous. Dangerous. The example in India, known for the failure of public health services. Public health services in India. It was a greater failure, the failure of government general hospitals, then a failure of basic public health services. So that led to a chronic health deficits in India. A chronic health deficits in India. That is because public health services represent as the institution of public mistrust. Public mistrust. Public mistrust. You see, a state minister of the state government of Tamil Nadu, who was diagnosed with the 3 blocks in the arteries, but thrust on private. He was diagnosed as with the 3 blocks in his arteries in the public hospital, but he demanded the private hospital because of lack of trust. You see, you daily visit the public general hospitals at evening. At evening, public general hospital, it became a normal scene in which the dead bodies are going out. Dead bodies are going out. Nobody raised the question. No system of accountability there. No system of accountability there. But every year, the budget allocates enormous fund and a separate ministry for the health in the union and the state level. At the same time, in parallel, in private, the lack of accountable structure of the private medical expenditure, medical accountability structures in the medical expenditure to the private. So in government health institution in India led to public mistrust that makes the public to depend more on the private. That makes the propelling factor towards the poverty trap. So wherever both the responsibility and accountability missing, wherever the responsibility and accountability missing, it leads to danger. What are the structural aspects of enforcing accountability in India? What are the structural aspects of enforcing accountability in India or the accountable institutions in India? The structural aspects of enforcing accountability in India as the parliamentary democracy of India, the 3 prime structural aspects of enforcing accountability in India. One is parliamentary control or collective responsibilities, parliamentary control. That means a government system of cabinet form of government system of parliamentary control. parliamentary control in the form of collective responsibility to the House of People, collective responsibility to the House of People, in which any act of omissions or commissions are being censured with the instruments of motions, with the instruments of the motions. Then parliamentary control on finance, parliamentary control on finance, parliamentary control on the policies, allocations, as well as scrutinization, in which the motions, as no confidence motions, censure motions, debates, questions, in which the parliamentary control on the elected government of being responsible to the House of the People, and House of the People in turn responsible to the people of India, in which public accountability in representative channels are being enforced. Then the second institution of accountability, enforcing accountability, was of judiciary. Judiciary is the guardian of Constitution and the custodian of fundamental rights in India. A guardian of constitutions and the custodian of fundamental rights, in which judiciary as accountability institutions of the state performs with the inherent power of judicial review, Then judicial activism, judicial scrutinization on any acts, as well as the in-house corrections, any acts as well as the in-house corrections. Then accountability, enforcement of accountability on civil service, enforcement of accountability on the civil service in the form of one, that means ministerial control, in which political executive, civil services has to perform in responsibility and accountable. Any acts of the civil services are being controlled by the ministerial control on the executive. Then the second one is audit establishments, the internal audit, interdepartmental audit, as well as the CAG audit. Then the institutions like the CAG, CVC, that means institutions that checking corruption, the Central Vigilance Commission, then Central Bureau of Investigation as the institutions checking corruption, naturally enforcing accountability, in which the enforcing the accountability, in which the second ARC commission, highlights naturally enforcing the accountability. You see, it was Robert Gilgart came out with the mathematical formula of power plus discretion minus accountability. Power plus discretion minus accountability leads to corruption. Powers plus Discretion minus accountability leads to corruption. It was the Santanam Committee of 1964. Santanam Committee of 1964 highlighted this equation even before Robert Kilcutt stated that the corruption in India, the corruption in the public institutions in India is become much entrenched to the extent of provision of the speed money, in the corporate budgets, the much entrenched system of corruption, as the Santanam Committee stated, two reasons. One is the existence of discretionary power. The discretionary power without accountability. Discretionary powers before accountability. Then the second reason is over centralization system in decision making. Over centralization in the decision making. But the two reasons that was highlighted also by ARC, Second Administrative Commission report. Highlighted that the corruption in India was due to the major reason. One was the pre-colonial legacy. The pre-colonial legacy known for the Mughal traditions of the Nasrana. Nasrana is a tradition of gifts to the authority, to the emperor, gifts to the authority of the emperor to have an appointment to him. The gifts in the form of gold, sometimes in the form of 6 girls, as the Islamic tradition. That is the pre-colonial legacy of the Nasrana. Nasrana legacy, the Divan of the Nasrana legacy. Then the centralization of the decision making. And the third reason was if the employment privilege of the civil services, employment privilege of the government services lacks the accountability. Employment privilege of the government services that lacks the accountability. That means accountability in which it needs a systemic transformation. From the traditional system known for centralized system, in which administration performed with the functional future of dissent. That means inward departmental files, top-down control. The inward departmental files without check and red tapeism. Whereas the transformation, what are the measures of accountability in the governance in India? The measures of accountability in the governance based on the strategies. One is enforcing social accountability in programs. enforcing the social accountability in programs. For example, Manjrika program as a national flagship program of the mandate jobs, known for the social audit associated with the people in the form of public announcement of intended projects. Then on the completion of the projects including the cost. Then inculcating the ethics as a form of public oath, for the functionaries. Then the third one is the strategy of participative transparency in the form of rights approach as the right to participatory transparency, as the Right to Information Act, where the citizens enjoy. That means from controlling the people and files, an approach towards empowering the people and the purpose, in which the principles of accountability, of people participation, people involved, enforce. So this seems to be the aspect of the accountability. That is the ethic. That is the ethical, the values and ethics in public administration, ethics of management. Then ethical concerns and dilemmas in government and private institutions. Laws, rules, regulations, and consigns as the sources of ethical guidance. Then accountability and ethical governance. Accountability and the ethical governance. Are those that we discussed today. நாலு டாபிக் பார்த்துமா. இப்போ 4 முக்கியம். கேசஸ்க்கு அப்ளை பண்ணணும் மோஸ்ட்லி. அப்புறம் பின்னாடி keeping the national security in mind, examine the ethical dilemmas related to the controversial orders of other ethical dilemma, but with the current people. One who devoted to one's duties attains highest perfections in the life. Analyze this statement with the reference to sense of responsibility and personal fulfillment in the civil servant. One who devoted to the one's duties attained highest perfections in the life. What are the senses of responsibility and personal fulfillment? Senses of responsibility, that means commitment to the duty, then compliance to the existing external structures, then objective of the welfare, in which a civil servant professional perfectness would be in the form of his actions of synthesis, harmonious synthesis of responsibility along with accountability. Any example? To achieve a goal, development goals, is consigns a more reliable guide when compared to laws, rules, regulations in the context of ethical decision making. இந்த மாதிரி இருந்தா நல்லா இருக்குங்களா? எக்ஸ்பிளிசிட்டா இதை எழுத முடியுமா? Laws, rules and regulations. Laws, rules and regulations are of external structures of compliance. Then consigns. Then a professional civil servant should act with the harmony. As integrations between the external and the internal compliance. Then see, besides the domain knowledge, a public official needs innovativeness and creativity of the higher order as well, while resolving the ethical dilemmas discussed with the suitable example. Discuss with the suitable example. What is the ethical dilemmas? Okay. What are the conditions why the ethical dilemma occurs? Ethical dilemma occurred. How we can resolve? With the priority and choices in approach. Okay. Then the refugees should not turn back to the country where they would face persecution or the human rights violation. Examine the statement with reference to ethical dimensions being violated by the nation claiming to be democratic with the open society. Examining the statement. What is the ethical situation there? Ethical situation is nothing but ethical dilemmas between the human rights and the concerns of the intrusions, is exasperated by the factors. What are the factors that exasperate the ethical dilemmas? One is the laws having the limitations, the factors that exasperate. Then the second one is kaleidoscope. A kaleidoscope of a democratic society, multiple views are the two factors. How we resolve? We can resolve with the priority that the human rights are more important than the nation. A nation is more important than the family. We can resolve. That is the aspect we can resolve by the approach of justice or common good. And the will to power exists, but it can be tamed to be guided rationally on principles of moral duty. Examine the statement international relations. Distinguish between laws and the rules. Discuss the role of ethics in formulating them. What is law? What is rule? What is rule? And what are regulations? What are the regulations? Difference between ethics and the laws and the rules is the deficit, is the difference is morality and the human factor, but can be synthesized with conscience. Laws and the rules become more humane when it synthesized with the call of conscience. Okay. Suppose the government of India is thinking of constructing a dam in the mountain valley bounded by forest, inhabited by the ethnic communities. What rational policy should be resorted in dealing with the unforeseen contingencies? This deals with ethical dilemma between the indigenous ethnic communities and the development. It is an ethical dilemma due to conflict between moralities of the ethnic communities' livelihood and legal mandate. How it can be resolved? How the ethical dilemmas can be resolved? Explain the process of resolving the ethical dilemmas. It can be resolved. How it can be resolved? One is understanding the factors and the grounds of the ethical dilemmas. It can be resolved. By prioritizing the values. Then it can be resolved with the choices in approach. Then integrations of the internal and the external factors of compliance. Okay. Then a mere compliance with the law is not enough. The public servant also has to have developed a sensibility to the ethical issues for effective discharge of duties. Why law is not enough? Because there is a difference between legality, morality, human factor. So simply compliance to the law will leads to mistrust. As a public servant of higher emotional intelligence shall act with a synthesis of law as a guidance and the call of conscience as compass. Law as a guidance and call of conscience as a directional compass to promote the welfare and public trust. What does accountability meant to the context of public service? What is accountability? Accountability based on external system. Why accountability meant to the context of the public service? Accountability is indispensable to avoid corruption. Robert Kilgut states that power plus discretion minus accountability leads to corruption. So what are the measures adopted to ensure individual and collective accountability of public servant. What are the measures for the public servants? What are the measures for the public servants? That is the measures, structural measures, that is political executive control, then judicial reviews of actions, then audit, internal audit, institutional supervision, then the external factors of confluence, code of conduct rules, procedural rules. There is a heavy ethical responsibility of the public servant, the article. It is often said that the politics and ethics do not go together. What is your opinion in this regard? Justify your answer. Why the politics and ethics do not go together? Is misplaced. Politics and ethics do not go together is a misplaced conceptions. Because of difference in the perception. Political perception is short-term, populist in the choice of priority of power and political goals. Whereas the ethics is of a structural perception, universal perception, universal across the time. It is uniform, universal, categorical imperatives, uniform across the time. The examples of a good politics with a good ethics is Gandhian politics. Political mobilization, good politics and the good ethics. Where the difference between bad and the good, synthesis of politics and ethics depends on leadership of ethical mind. Illustration, Gandhian politics. What do you understand by the term voice of conscience? How do you prepare yourself to heed to the voice of conscience? Voice of conscience. Voice of conscience is not of a short-term built-up. Voice of conscience is of personality character, expression of personality character, a spontaneous flow of his career. Voice of conscience formulated as a socialization default of tender age, educational values, educational systems, peer group persuasion, educational system. What is the significance of voice of conscience? Voice of conscience is a savior at the time of crisis. Voice of conscience is a advisor at the time of dilemmas. Voice of conscience is a lever to support anchor values. That is the voice of conscience. To support the anchor values, how we prepare to heed to the voice of conscience. We prepare with the heed to the voice of conscience with a balance with the factors of external factors of laws, rules, and the procedures. Our voice of conscience is not unbridled of violating the external structures. Example, Armstrong Palmy. Example. Practice. Have more practice. See you next class. இது இன்னும் நம்ம பார்க்க வேண்டியது இது இது வரைக்கும் பார்த்தோம் இல்லையா? இது வரைக்கும் பார்த்துட்டோம் இல்லையா? Strengthening ethical and moral values of governance as simple. Then international, then probity in governance. 2 classes. Once applications. Once application போயிட்டீங்க உடனே எழுத ஆரம்பிச்சு. ஓகே, எழுதிரும் அவ்வளோ. See you next class. இது ஸ்லைட்ஸ் ஈவினிங் அனுப்புறலாம். அது பாருங்க, அந்த புக்கு இது கிளாஸ் நோட்ஸ் ஸ்லைட்ஸ் பார்க்கணும். ஆன்சர் ரேடியோ ஆன்சர் 250 190 கிராஸ் பண்ணாங்க. நீ மட்டும் தான் இருக்கீங்களா?